Now, our next speaker is the Academic Director of FreedomProject Education, an Assistant Professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. He spends his time on the front lines trying to undo what public education has done to students. Teaching the truth certainly has its perils, and our speaker has certainly seen his share of them. He has taught at various universities over the last 16 years and has taught a range of courses for high school students. He was instrumental in creating and launching courses in the Texas public school system. A true classical education and Americanist advocate, he has worked tirelessly to overcome challenges from the school system and courts to help make these courses available to interested high schoolers here in Texas. He has created and teaches courses for FreedomProject Education for our high school curriculum. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Duke Pesta.
Thank you. Freedom Project Education. It is our attempt to try to fix the problem that has crept into almost every aspect of public discourse and that you can see really on display from the President of the United States and our administration that controls the country. This notion that there is no longer any such thing as truth. In a world where truth has gone away, then all that's left is politics. And you can see how divisive and how corrupting this is. It's been a while now since liberalism started to do away with the notion of truth. The problem with the notion of truth is that it's not diverse. Right answers are right answers, and that leaves no room for wrong ones. And we have sort of decided, particularly in the field of education, we have sort of decided now that the truth is oppressive, that the idea that anyone can have the truth is exclusionary. As a teacher, I see it at every level. I've taught at the high schools, I've taught middle school, I've taught university students, I've taught PhD candidates. And each of these groups, for years and years now, has been hearing from their educators that there is no such thing as truth. Where did this idea come from? It's Marxist, of course, goes all the way back to before Marx, but Marx's famous observation about religion being the opiate of the people and the idea that those of us who actually believe there are moral, ethical truths in the world, we are the ones who are the most deluded. I think of what George Orwell famously said, that we have now sunk to a depth at which restatement of the obvious is the first duty of an intelligent man. At the university I teach at, even math and the sciences is being infected by this way of thinking. There's a new movement out there, preached by intellectuals and academics, called cultural math. Have you heard of this? Cultural math. Yeah, cultural math is the idea that numbers, and in particularly right answers, are racist, sexist, and bigoted. One of the perils of Western European thought, Americanism, right? That all this emphasis we place on getting the right answers when we do math, that's offensive, because the point of math is not right answers. In cultural math, the point of math is to make the student feel good about numbers and feel good about their own math experience. I mentioned in an earlier talk today that an entire book by a member of my faculty in Wisconsin has been written on the subject of cultural math. And it talks about such remarkable things as, you know, it really is unfair if you look at traditional textbooks. In traditional math textbooks, Johnny might have 2 apples and Sally might have 3 oranges. But what about somebody born in Alaska, where there aren't apples and oranges? Do you see how this is racist and exclusionary? And the purpose and the premise of mathematics, of course, never is. As I also said earlier today, boy, that makes for some sketchy engineering. Do you really want your architects and engineers to be less concerned about the totals of numbers and the proper figuring of numbers than these types of sensitivities? And even in the hardcore sciences, you go to any college campus these days, even the big ones, the big science communities, the MITs, Berkeleys, all across the country, you will see how gender science now, we're taught, differs based on your gender. That somehow we have come to the conclusion that women do science differently than men. So you see all these courses advertised for biology, women in biology or women in chemistry. And the serious argument is that what a male chemist studies and understands about his field is totally different from what a female chemist does. I mean, it's insulting to the point of childishness. But this is what's going on in our colleges and universities. And it trickles down because the entire curriculum, from kindergarten all the way through high school, every bit of it is set at the university level. Professors who make these decisions, and it is a shocking thing that 2,000 years of Western morality and ethics, 2,000 years from, and beyond actually, go back to Moses and the Ten Commandments and through the Sermon on the Mount and upway through the scholastic philosophers and Thomas Aquinas and all the way through Renaissance thinking and 19th century ethical philosophy, all of those fine distinctions that we have historically made between good and bad, right and wrong, true and false, they've been absolutely erased in our school systems. And all of those virtues and all of that emphasis on scales and right behaving and right thinking and ethical choices, it has been completely removed and replaced with one virtue. And if you spend any time in the school system, you know what that one remaining virtue is. Gone is chastity. Gone is fidelity. All of them byproducts of a more insensitive time, we're told. Chastity, I think, if you know anything about the public school systems or our culture in general, you'll see that today, right? That rather than teach chastity, we've reached the point in our schools where to be sexually promiscuous is considered open-minded and tolerant and judicious. And to be chaste is considered to be repressive and prudish. I've seen it with the high school girls I've taught, the college girls I've taught, that to make yourself sexually available is to be tolerant and welcoming. Not to do so makes you a bigot, makes you insensitive. Our kids learn these lessons at a very early age. And so we've replaced all of these former considerations with one virtue. There's only one liberal virtue now, and that is the virtue of tolerance. And we know full well, right? And our kids know at a very early age that as long as you're a tolerant person, you can do whatever you want. As long as I'm willing to tolerate whatever you do and say and are, as long as I'm willing to tolerate any behavior from you, you'll tolerate me, right? That I can get away with whatever I want to. There are no rules and there are no laws. This is where we've reached. This is the point that we've reached in higher education, and unfortunately, that higher education has seeped down all the way to the levels of kindergarten. I once was teaching a class it was about 6th graders, I believe, and there were 20-something of them. And I asked them that question, what's true? And I was hearing from 6th graders, one young 6th grade girl said to me, well, truth is just a made-up idea, Dr. Pesta. Nothing's really true. And there's this weird sense with all of the postmodernism that has seeped into contemporary education, this idea that, you think about it from university classroom perspective, I tell my students this all the time. You're sitting in a classroom here where there are no consequences. It's all just abstract ideas. You look at the buildings on campus, they're all built by men and women who have entered the business field. We professors haven't built anything. The campuses that we inhabit are built and maintained, cleaned up, prettied, readied by other people than us. We have no investment in it. We are tended to on these campuses. And yet we have no sense of where the sacrifice and the worldview that built all that. I was dealing with some business students the other day, and they're the most anti-capitalist group of business juniors and seniors I've ever seen. They are taught by us as business students to be skeptical, dismissive about the capitalist system. The one thing they find really interesting, and the only thing they want to talk about, is how Steve Jobs gave away a lot of his money, or that Bill Gates has this foundation, right? Utterly apolitical in their minds, where they give money to people. That's the point of a business degree. These were the same kids that I took around. I stopped class in the middle and said, okay, enough of this. I'm an English professor. It's a scary day, believe me, when professors of English have to show business students the premises of capitalism. Because the fact is there aren't many English professors who are going to do it. I stopped class and I walked them all around the campus, and I pointed out all the buildings. And I asked them whose names were on all those buildings, who built that stadium. And every single one of those people were business people. You can't have that unless you can't get to be a Bill Gates if you undermine the capitalist premise on which those institutions were built. Truth. And you know, as bad as they're treating capitalism in our business schools, as bad as truth is suffering at every level of our educational system, history. Orwell also pointed out that he who controls the past controls the future. and he who controls the present controls the past. Well, the present in American education has been dominated by extremist liberals for about 75 years now. And because they control the present, what gets taught in schools and what doesn't get taught, you see, not surprisingly, that 75-year window just about begins to correspond to the time when American education started to tank. He who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. What Orwell's trying to say to you, I think, is we've got a real crisis here. If what our students are learning is nothing is true, that all behaviors are acceptable if they're tolerated equally, that's the death of education. One of the answers to this, at least at the lower grades, is homeschooling. Homeschooling is undergoing quite a renaissance these days, and it's about time. But the resistance to homeschool, American citizens taking charge of the education of their own children, the resistance to this at the highest levels is staggering. The funny thing, though, is colleges keep admitting more and more homeschool students. Why? If the colleges and the universities are all so terribly worried about it, why do we keep admitting homeschool kids at a proportionate level that exceeds almost all other groups of kids going to college? It's because those kids are prepared. The great argument that you get from colleges and universities is, well, yes, they know math and science. They know history and they can write real well. They never skip classes, and they don't need discipline, and they're very self-motivated, but they're socially awkward, aren't they? And what does socially awkward mean to a university professor? It just simply means that the kid has got standards. Not promiscuous, not slovenly, not disrespectful. And it's amazing to what degree our liberal educators want to do away with, impose all sorts of restrictions on homeschooling. Precisely because when the kids get there, they don't fall lockstep in line with this amoral standards and objectives that university professors want to set for themselves. I want to talk to you about one more Orwell quote as we move forward here. He also said, "During times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act." I do tell my students all the time, and it is amazing. I said this earlier today as well. The thing is that our kids have been educated. We turn them over to government schools. And I've talked to many Christian families, and I ask them, devout Christian families, why do you send your kids to public schools? And the answer I very often get is, well, we want them to be ambassadors of truth in a place of darkness. We want them to be shining examples, to show a corrupt system. There's a danger there. I don't know about you, but I've been in a lot of places in this world, and I've never met an 8-year-old ambassador. Ambassadors, like business majors, have to be trained in what's true and false, like English majors and history majors. Someone has to tell them the truth, but no one does it. I recently, and very often, survey my classes to find out what they know and what they don't know, and I tell this story a lot. In a class of 32 students, I had 29 who knew that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, and only 2 that knew he was president of the United States. No one tells the truth about history. My kids do not know, overwhelmingly, these are college juniors and seniors, they don't know that there was a slave trade anywhere else in the world but America. They cannot talk about slavery in any other context. And the one thing they know more than anything else about American history is the slave trade. I point out to them all the time that look around you. 40, 50 years ago, during the wild 1960s, at least you could say then that college students were actually rebelling against their professors. That first wave of protests, right? All the anti-war protesting, they were rebelling in many instances against their professors and against the curriculum, a curriculum based in truth. Look at you now, I say to them. Over 92% of graduating college seniors vote the way their professors do, at least in the first 2 election cycles. Think about that. The professoriate is to the left of Hollywood on most issues, and sometimes not even as eloquent as that. 92% of graduating college seniors, for at least 8 years, at least 2 election cycles, vote overwhelmingly the way their professors do. I point out to the students all the time, you realize, don't you, that the only way on this campus that you can conceivably rebel is to become a conservative. If there's hope out there, it's this. that this fog, this 20-year fog some of them get from kindergarten all the way through college, and graduate school certainly, it's easy to blow it away. It doesn't take more than a half semester with these kids of simply showing them the opposite side of the story, simply exposing them to a different way of seeing things. And that's the funny thing about tolerance, isn't it? I thought tolerance, as liberals like to use it, I thought tolerance was about tolerating everybody's ideas. It's not. It's a profound tool of fascism, isn't it? That you're going to tolerate us, but I don't have to tolerate you. As a matter of fact, as a tolerant person, the minute you set any standard, draw any boundary, insist on any rule, underwrite any law, you are being, by definition, intolerant. It is abundantly clear. Before any of this could happen, Christ and God had to go away from our schools. And that's why we do see a twisted tolerance, don't we, from our academics, for Islamic extremism, for clitorectomies and honor killings in other parts of the country. We see a remarkable tolerance for the oppression of all sorts of people across the world. Tolerance for us means we get to decide what we tolerate. And that's why Christ, much more than anything else in the modern university, the idea of Christ is precisely what we cannot tolerate. Any place where rules are drawn finely, that cannot be tolerated. It is amazing, though, when you look at, we will tolerate no dissent from global warming on our college campuses. The idea that universities are tolerant places, we've said this many times. In the modern university, tolerance and diversity, it means everybody looks different, but everybody thinks the same. The whole 20th century, actually, has been marked, hasn't it, the previous 100 years, by almost all of the West's great writers have been men and women who have written dystopic novels. You've got Orwell, right, 1984, books like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, right? The entire corpus of the works of C.S. Lewis, warning us of one thing, and one thing only. When men play fast and loose with the truth, the very stays of civilization cannot remain. This sense that you see on college campuses, that nothing is right, nothing is wrong, nothing is true, nothing is false, it's responsible for grade inflation. It's responsible for the idea, as one audience member pointed out to me today in one of our earlier talks, the idea that you cannot fail out of college now. That if we fail you out, that's a $60,000 loss for us. We talked about how, as part of this campaign, President Obama has taken control of the student loan industry. Now anybody who wants it is going to get it. And you know Obama's objective, right? In particular, those who have no business being in college, they're the ones who are going to get the money first, as a way of leveling the playing field. What's happened to colleges and universities over the last 30 years absolutely mirrored in every other aspect of American society. Right? You've seen it in these unions, right? Whether they're the teacher union protests in Wisconsin where I live, union members all across the board, right? That it's much more important for union members to keep their jobs than it is for the bad ones to be gotten rid of. Right? The concern is not and never has been for education. Education has always ultimately been about telling the truth, right? And we've reached the point where it's become a revolutionary act. It is an act of absolute revolution. Did you see Chris Matthews the other day? He was angry that Romney kept insisting that Obama answer the questions. Chris Matthews was absolutely nonplussed that somebody would actually stand up and say, hey, there's a right and wrong here. It's sort of, well, not that he had a lot of brain to short circuit anyway. A lot of tingling, but not a lot of brain activity. Truth. Freedom Project Education is one way. For me, it became simple. Got tired of teaching colleges. By the time they're 22 and 23 years old and they get to me, they're already beyond hope. Incredibly indoctrinated, but without any knowledge base whatsoever. So I went down to the high school level, volunteered to teach there. It was already too late then. I actually taught for 3 years as a volunteer in a Catholic school, trying to teach things like theology. And I'm not there anymore because one day I was teaching a course in Christian morality at a Catholic school. And I showed a short video, nothing dangerous about it. It was a short video that pointed out very clearly all the ways that Planned Parenthood targets kids their age and tries to turn them into sexual objects. Well, the Catholic superintendent of this school called me into his office after the class was over and said, "How dare you present in a Catholic theology class, a Catholic morality class, how dare you present a video that criticizes Planned Parenthood? What are these kids going to do if they need reproductive services right away?" I'm not there anymore. And if this is all the way on down the line, so it's my question to you earlier, right, to those Catholic moms or Christian moms and dads who I've asked many times, why do you turn your kids over to them? This ambassador thing? You wouldn't feed your kids lead paint at breakfast. I mean, you know full well that a few hours down the road they're going to be sick, right? This sense that we'll turn our kids over to the public schools to be educated, it's a dangerous thing. And we all hear the horror stories. A number of you came up to me after this morning's talk and said, well, I got one daughter. She went off to, we let her go to the public high school, and she's the one that's lost now. She's the one that's lost her way. She went to a college, big public school, as opposed to the small Christian college we wanted to send her to, and now she doesn't believe anything anymore. I can't tell you how many of my faculty colleagues over the last 15 years will say without any shame and without any sense of trying to hide it, that they see it as their number one mission to take away from these kids what you've tried so hard to instill in them. They see that as education. See, you've taught them truth, haven't you? Taught them that there's right and wrong. You taught them that merit matters. You've taught them that you get what you earn. You pay for what you get. You've taught them that there's true and false. You've taught them that there's a God in heaven. And our faculties across the country will not let that stand. And they are remarkably effective in taking it away. For me, something like Freedom Project became the only way. Try to deal with those kids who aren't in the schools. Work with moms and dads, and there are millions of them in this country, who recognize the problem and who are educating their own kids at home. We can get them then. We can keep them on the path to citizenship. We can keep them on the path to understanding what America's history actually is, as opposed to what the academics say it is. Teaching kids to be proud of their country. Patriotism. Do you have any idea how bad a word patriotism is on a college campus? It's intimately associated with colonialism. If you love America, you hate the rest of the world. Tell me we haven't reaped that with the current young college professor president we have. We haven't had a college professor president since Woodrow Wilson. And if you know your American history, most of you probably grew up in an age when you learned that that's not a good thing. It's not a good comparison, Woodrow Wilson and Barack Obama. Same foreign policy obtuseness, the same tendency to want to subordinate the prerequisites, the rights, the hard-won freedoms of Americans to some perverse global sense of entitlement in government. But how does all this fly? In a world where the benefits of capitalism are so obvious, our kids don't realize this. Our kids actually believe, our students, my college kids actually believe that there are as many people starving in America as in India or Africa. They've been led to believe by us that there are kids lying in streets all across America with bloated bellies and flies crawling across the eyelids. But again, there is hope. In about half a semester with these kids, you can blow this fog away. You can show them simply by demonstrating the facts, simply by showing them an unadulterated version of history, simply by talking to them as adults. I've said before that our kids, they've got brains. What they don't have is an education. Hundreds of thousands of dollars spent to get a 6-year degree, and that's the other thing. You see how watered down our campuses are? You see how watered down our curriculum is? And our kids still can't graduate in 4 years. They're taking 6, 7 years to get a 4-year degree in women's studies, and they're $200,000 in debt when they get it. They're not getting jobs. Organizations like Freedom Project, sponsored by the American Opinion Foundation, a subset of the JBS itself, one of the things we're trying very hard to do is reach these kids in the home, teach them American history as it happened. We are not multiculturalists. Another twisted, perverse ideology, right? Multicultural education. the idea that all countries are equal. And if all countries are equal, then America's got to be the worst. Because you look around at all these other countries, right? And if we're all equal, how come we're so rich? How come we're so influential? How come we're so powerful? Well, the only answer can be because we all start from that premise, right? That we're all intrinsically equal. The only way can be raping other cultures, stealing, robbing, appropriating too much from the rest of the world. Never a sense of what we've given back to the world. Never a sense of what we've done with that investment. Never a sense of how many other nations we've felt, how many other nations' kids we've educated, for right or for wrong. Never any acknowledgement of those things. Always a stick and a tool with which to beat America. It's a crisis. You look at any survey of college campuses, and easily 9 out of 10. In some departments like mine, English, 48 out of 50 English professors are leftists, self-identified leftists. Mine is the discipline that you'll find Bill Ayers reaping a huge pension from the government he once tried to blow up, right? Laughing all the way to the bank on that one. Truth. We're never going to fix this problem if every new generation that comes after us, we allow them to be reared on the idea that nothing's true. That's what's happening. Do you wonder why the numbers are so close? There are no practitioners of cultural math here, are there? Anybody concerned? No, there aren't. You can see the numbers, right? So why are the electoral numbers so close? It's because we're turning out generation after generation of kid who goes on to be voting adult, who hasn't the vaguest idea what numbers mean, who have no understanding of economic truth. We're going to lose it. We're going to lose this country unless the idea that there is truth. Most importantly, absolutely. Most importantly in terms of moral behavior. But if you can see the degree to which the sciences, math itself now, has become subject to opinion, subject the tolerance crowd. American academics teaching your kids that it doesn't matter what the right answer is. And if it doesn't matter what the right answer, sounds like a campaign slogan for Obama, doesn't it? It doesn't matter what the right answer is. Give me 4 more years, right? 4 more years of this. If you have kids yourself, or your kids are older, you have a brother or a sister, the neighbor family down the block, struggling to figure out what to do about this, the biases that kids come home with. Well, the first thing I would say is there is no greater responsibility. You have to think about it this way. There's no greater responsibility than to make sure those kids get the right kind of education. An education that teaches them how to think for themselves, to draw logical conclusions. They're not getting that now. And the economy's bad, but homeschooling, taking responsibility for your own kids' education. Freedom Project Education is here to help with that. A lot of moms out there, a lot of dads know how to teach writing and reading to their kids, but when it comes to teaching chemistry or advanced mathematics, it's beyond them. Groups like Freedom Project are able to do that, to help, to partner with, not to take over the role of homeschool parents, but to partner with them. And as simple a thing as it seems, it all goes back to this notion that we lost about 35, 40 years ago, that there is a discernible truth. Unless we reinstate that, it's not going to matter. And you see the consequences of not believing in that anymore. I thank you very much.